I am very pleased to be able to address the Kiev Security Forum this year. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but I wish you the best success for the online meeting. We are at a very crucial stage in the world's political history. We were facing numerous challenges to democracy in the years prior to the COVID pandemic, and the health crisis has worsened many of these trends. Democracy has been threatened in several ways. The first has to do with the rise of a number of authoritarian states, most notably Russia and China. Russia has intervened in the affairs of its neighbors and in the politics of democratic countries, including the United States. It has developed a number of new tools for destabilizing democracies worldwide, like the weaponization of the internet, and a new form of hybrid warfare that has allowed it to send military forces into other countries and yet deny that it is doing so. President Putin does not have a strong foundation on which to build great power status. The Russian economy has failed to modernize, and it is too heavily dependent on fossil fuels and high energy prices to be viable. Nonetheless, he has taken a weak hand and converted it into political influence by taking enormous risks. He has invaded Georgia and Ukraine and sent forces as far afield as Venezuela. This high level of risk-taking has made Russia the arbiter of the outcomes in certain regions, but it has also come at a high price in terms of international isolation and sanctions by Western countries. China is a larger long-term threat to global democracy than Russia, though it is a lesser immediate danger to Ukraine. The Chinese economy is larger and much more dynamic than Russia's. China's firms are taking the lead in developing 21st century technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. The Chinese have powerful tools for expanding their influence, including the ability to build infrastructure under the Belt and Road Initiative. As their power has grown, their ambitions have expanded. The second huge challenge to democracy is the rise of populism in established democracies like the United States and a number of European countries. Populist leaders are democratically elected and then use their mandates to undermine the rule of law in their countries. This has happened in Hungary, Poland, and in the United States. My country today suffers from a crippling degree of political polarization, which has been exploited by both Moscow and Beijing and has limited its ability to play its historical leadership role in Europe. The United States is, obviously, a country of particular importance to Ukraine, and the election coming up on November 3rd will be a critical one. President Trump has clearly expressed his sympathy for an authoritarian Putin regime over a democratic Ukraine. Up to now, he has not been able to act on this preference by, for example, lifting sanctions on Russia, but this will likely change if he is re-elected. Under a Biden presidency, U.S. backing of Ukraine will be restored. Ukrainians should not, however, take American support for granted, even under a new administration. It will depend very much on whether Ukraine's democratic institutions continue to develop, and whether the country makes progress in the fight against corruption. American taxpayers are not going to want to see their dollars going to a country where state resources disappear into the pockets of officials. There are clear measures that the country can take to strengthen its anti-corruption institutions and increase the accountability of politicians, and the U.S. needs to see that these policies are being implemented. The COVID pandemic has put political institutions under great stress and has demonstrated the importance of three things that are necessary to successfully contain the disease. The first is having sufficient state capacity to deal with health emergencies. This means having adequate numbers of doctors, nurses, and other frontline medical workers, facilities, and the resources to back them. The second factor is an intangible one, which is social trust. This means trust between citizens and trust that citizens have for their government. If trust does not exist, then citizens will not voluntarily take the kinds of health measures like quarantines and social distancing necessary to contain the disease. The final factor, the third one, has to do with the right kind of political leadership. In a pandemic, bad decisions by individual leaders have led to disastrous results. In particular, populist leaders often perform poorly in pandemics because they do not want to be associated with bad news, and they fail to take seriously the threats that emerge to their role. Belarus may be an example of this. Alexander Lukashenko did not take the pandemic seriously and dispensed bad advice in its early days for how to fight it. In the case of a pandemic, the cause and effect relationship between bad leadership and bad outcomes becomes quickly evident, and that may have served as a trigger for the massive protests against his dictatorship that have emerged in recent weeks. The protests in Belarus show that no one wants to live under a stagnant dictatorship. It shows that the spirit of 1989 or of 1991 is not dead yet, and that popular mobilizations will continue. The major worry about Belarus is, of course, Russia. For President Putin, the protests there constitute an existential threat to his regime. He knows that they could emerge in Russia at any point and lead to his overthrow. For that reason, he cannot allow them to succeed and is using every resource at his disposal to stop them. I have been to Ukraine many times in the past few years and regret that I am not able to visit now. I do this because I believe that Ukraine is a key country in the global geopolitics today and for the future of democracy around the world. If Ukraine does not succeed in building democratic institutions and in dealing with corruption, then few other countries in the region will be able to succeed either. On the other hand, Ukraine can become an inspiration and a beacon for other people who want to live in free and democratic societies, like so many do in Belarus today. For this reason, I believe that the work of the Kiev Security Forum is extremely important, and I wish you and your country the greatest success in the future. Thank you very much.